Hello everyone, back to today's first video. We're going to look at some more spring analogues for today's first video. So on Sunday we did the final spring 2019 analogues update, and we said that's pretty much it for the analogues, and we're going to get the forecast together. But our analogues guru James Ackrell has come through with some more analogues for us, this time looking at February, both very mild springs following very mild Februaries, and also springs following dry Februaries. The reason we've had to do it like this is because we started so late with the updates due to taking December off, and then of course we lost January pretty much due to the shutdown in America, the shutdown with NOAA. So the upshot is we've been battling against the clock to get everything fitted in, and we did want to bring you these analogues for February, so we thought we'd do like an extra time update just this one. So this is ahead of course of the spring forecast being released tomorrow on Sunday. Have a gasoffice.com spring 2019 forecast for you. So I'll get on with your extra time analogues update for the spring very shortly. Just say that coming up later on today we'll have the weekend forecast, of course, as always on a Saturday. Have weekend forecast, and we'll also have a detailed look at the weather for the next week to 10 days with the GFS and the ECM. As well. Just going to be quite a long video as always with the longer range stuff, so if you can't watch it all in one go, the video will be placed on the spring updates and forecast page later on today with a written summary, just going over everything that we discussed in the video. And that'll be up this evening for you, so you'll be able to come back and watch that whenever you want on demand to have a read of that written summary. Big thank you to Analogues Guru James for sending through the spring 2019 analogues, and without any further ado, I think we'll get on with it. So we're going to begin by having a look at the central England temperature. So we've had an exceptionally mild February. This is the CET from Hadley. So 2019 just there, of course, and we are currently sitting at 6.7 on our February CET. That is finalised now, it won't change. So, as I say, exceptionally mild February. If we go back through the years, we actually see that it's been mildest February since 2002, just there, which came out at 7.0. At one time it did look so we might come out around 7 degrees for this February, but we just came in a shade underneath. But anyway, exceptionally mild February. So the first thing we've got to do with our analogues is look at springs that are following exceptionally mild Februaries. So starting us off is February 1867, which had a CET of 6.9, and of course this is the spring of 1867. So spring 1867, following this exceptionally mild February, finds an area of above average heights across much of southern Europe, and below average heights from the UK from the Atlantic into UK into Northern Europe. There's a little bit of a weak blocking signal, but it is very weak. Basically, it looks like a very unsettled spring. This low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, so showers with longer spells of rain, and probably quite mild too. It's a fairly Atlantic-driven flow with heights to the south. You expect quite a mild sort of spring there. Our next exceptionally mild February is one of the mildest on record. It's February 1869, coming out with a CET of 7.5. And the spring of 1869 looks like this. So again, very unsettled spring in 1869, below average heights through much of the UK from the Atlantic into Europe. Jet stream's on a little bit more of a southerly track as well, but it's a fairly cold March in 1869. Of course, the winter of 1868-1869 is the warmest winter on record. It hasn't been beaten, certainly not for the CET. Warmest winter on record for 1868-1869. The spring of 1868-1869 was unsettled, and at times, particularly early on, it was a bit on the cold side as well. The next February centering temperature with a CET of 6.9 is 1872. This other spring of 1872 is looking. So again, another quite unsettled spring. Maybe a bit of a trend for that with these in the Victorian area anyway, with below average heights as a trough centred over top of the country. This could be a bit cold as well. We have got some high pressure up towards Greenland, which you would think could be forcing some colder air into that trough of below average heights. The ridges across eastern, southeastern parts of Europe, so warm air up to there. That looks like it could be a bit of a colder spring and quite unsettled too. Next February is that of 1903. Again, coming out with an exceptionally mild CET of 7.1. The spring of 1903 is again looking very unsettled. Deep trough of below average height centred over the top of the country. Just looks like a really unsettled spring in 1903. Next February is 1914. It has a CET of 6.8. The spring of 1914, which is showing up quite a lot in our analogues packages this year, is again unsettled but mild. This time we're bringing in westerly, southwesterly winds. It's quite unsettled with low pressure close to the country, so there's a fair amount of rain, but it's a mild spring in 1914. The next February is 1918 with a CET of 6.5. The spring of that 1918 looks like this. So we've got below average heights in the Atlantic. We have got above average heights to our northeast. And we're probably bringing up some quite mild air, some quite warm air at times from a southerly to southeasterly direction. That's a little bit less unsettled, that one. The next February centering temperature is that of 1926, and it has a CET of 6.8. The spring of 1926, again looking quite unsettled. Below average heights in the Atlantic. They've got low pressure in the Atlantic Ocean just there. And we're bringing in the westerlies again from off the Atlantic. So a relatively Atlantic-driven spring in 1926. This is our first anticyclonic spring. So this is 1945. It follows an exceptionally mild February in 1945 with a CET of 7.1. And this one is a much more anticyclonic signal. So we've got above average height centred through the UK and also to our south. Lots of quiet weather, bringing up the winds from a southerly southwesterly direction. That looks like a very pleasant spring indeed in 1945. Lots of dry and pretty mild weather. A long gap then to 1961, so there's an exceptionally mild February in 1961 for CET of 6.9. Spring 1961 looks quite unsettled and chilly. Actually, we've got below average heights to the east and above average heights to the west. I'm not sure it's that unsettled actually. There's probably quite a bit of dry weather because the Atlantic is blocked off, but it does look like it would be a fairly chilly spring. You'll expect to be bringing the winds in from the north with that one. Then we go through to 1990, so again, pretty long run, 29 years, and we come to the February of 1990, exceptionally mild month with a CET of 7.3. The spring of 1990, again, much more anticyclonic one with above average height centred over the UK and also across much of Europe as well. Below average heights are up to the north. The jet streams up here, so we're on the warm side of a jet stream, but close to that big ridge of high pressure. That's a dry and warm spring in 1990. And then 1995, so all of a sudden these warm Februaries are getting much more frequent. This is how the February, this is how the spring of 1995 looks following the February CT, which should say 6.5, I believe, not 5.5. So the spring of 1995 looks like this. Below average heights to our east, above average heights to our west. It's a very dry spring in 1995. There's some quite chilly weather early on, particularly March 1995. It's quite a chilly month. There's quite a cold snap in April 1995 as well. And then in May it gets much warmer, especially early May 1995 has a real heat wave. And then we only have a couple of years until we're up to our next exceptionally mild February, which is 1997. Has a CET of 6.7, bang on the Central England temperature for February 2019, the spring of 1997, and it's showing up quite a bit in our analogues package as well, I have to say, this year. Again, above average height, centering itself right over the top of the UK. Very dry and mild, in fact quite warm weather in March and April. It flips a bit in May, turns cooler and also a lot wetter in May 1997. And then look at this, 1998. So many warm Februaries in the 1990s. Truly remarkable. So we have 1998 coming up next with a February CT of 7.3. The spring of 1998 has above average heights out to the west. And otherwise not much in way of below average heights to our east. It's a funny spring, this. It has an exceptionally wet and cold April, an unsettled and chilly March, exceptionally wet and cold April with flooding rains through the Midlands in particular in April 1998, and then a really warm and dry May, early summer in May. In fact, the best of the summer of 1998 was in May of 1998, and then the rest of the summer, except for a week or so in August, was really poor. So the spring of 1998 is a funny spring, but there is an appreciable spell of cold, wet weather through April 1998. And then our last exceptionally mild February, with a CET above 6.5, is actually that of February 2002. Which we just looked at the start of the video, of course. Has a CT of 7.0 in February, the spring of 2002, looking like this. So it's got above average heights over Scandinavia, and below average heights are in the Atlantic. It's quite an unsettled spring, quite a lot of dry weather, particularly sort of pleasant in April and May of 2002. I remember there was quite a gale in March 2002, but overall it's a fairly dry and not particularly exciting spring. It's quite a warm spring as well in 2002. Now, putting all of that together, this is how all of the Marches are coming out when you're following very warm Februaries. So, for March, all years combined has an area of above average heights pretty much across central parts of Europe. Below average heights are up to the north. We're bringing up warm air from a southerly, southeast direction. Mild month is favoured here, potentially very mild, and with a lot of dry weather in there as well. April looks pretty decent too. So in April we have the above average heights kind of like to our south. Below average heights are in the Atlantic and to the north. The jet stream is going up there. So on the warm side, the mild side of the jet with high pressure centred to our south, bringing up very mild air from off the Atlantic. So March and April looking really favoured to be warmer, drier when we follow these warm Februaries. But then look what happens in May. May shows a very clear deterioration. So in May, we set up an area of above average heights on average. Well, there will be years that are deviating from this pattern, but on average, when you combine all of these years that follow warm Februaries, in May we set up an area of above average heights over Greenland. We push the jet stream southwards with this trough of below average heights, so it turns a lot cooler to average, and it also turns potentially a lot more unsettled in May when we follow a warm February. Putting it all together though, the actual springs themselves don't look too bad at all. This is a pretty decent signal for the springs following these warm Februaries. We're favouring a mild spring here with above average heights centred to our south. Below average heights are up to the north. We're bringing up the winds from a southwesterly direction. And so you would expect to be favouring reasonably dry and mild conditions, particularly so through March and through April. A little bit less so in May. May does look favoured to be a bit cooler and wetter, but overall pretty decent signals here for the spring when we follow a very warm February. Right, so pause the video there, and when we come back, we'll have a look at the top 30 driest Februaries on record and the springs that follow them, because we think February 28, 2019 will probably finish up somewhere in the top 30 driest Februaries for England and Wales. So we'll have a look at that in a couple of minutes. Go and get yourself a cup of tea and a couple of biscuits, and we'll meet back here very shortly when we'll go through those top 30 driest Februaries and the springs that follow them. Alright, we're back, and we're going to go through the top 30 driest Februaries now for England and Wales, and see what the springs were like that followed those top 30 driest Februaries. So we've already looked at the CET data. We've looked at springs following exceptionally mild central temperatures with a CET above 6.5 and upwards, generally favouring a warm and dry spring, a mild dry spring, although with a bit of a deterioration perhaps in May. Let's see what the data shows for dry February. So I should just explain, we don't know yet how dry February 2019 hasn't been updated at Hadley in terms of the England and Wales total precipitation for this month. And actually it hasn't been updated for January yet. They seem to be running quite late doing that at Hadley. So we're just sort of guessing a little bit with this. We think it's probably going to finish up as a top 30 driest February, but until it's confirmed, we need to stay a bit cautious about it. But anyway, for our final lot of analogues, for our final batch of analogues, we're going to look at the top 30 driest February. So we begin at number 30, which is 1854. And the spring of 1854 looks like this. It's quite anticyclonic, actually. Has an area of high pressure across the country. Low pressure's up to the north. That looks like a very nice spring. You'd expect that to be generally quite mild and pretty dry on the pattern. Number 29 in terms of the top 30 driest Februaries is 1964, and the spring of 1964 has above average heights to the northeast, below average heights out to the west. I think that's a fairly pleasant spring in 1964. Number 28 for the top 30 driest Februaries for England and Wales is 2012. The spring of 2012 has an area of above average heights from the Atlantic into Europe. This is a funny spring. It has a very dry, exceptionally dry March. It's also dry and warm generally in May. But in between, in April 2012, it's very unsettled. And a very wet May in 2012. And actually, I say about a warm and dry May, actually wasn't that good in May. The pattern really was deteriorating, I think, from April 2012. Although there was a fairly hot spell of weather through May 2012. It probably was the hottest in May 2012, but it was throughout that terrible summer of 2012. But overall, I don't think May 2012 is actually that good. But overall, for the reanalysis for this spring, it is a bit of an anticyclonic signal. Next spring is 1851. This follows the 27th driest February for England and Wales. And this is a more unsettled spring with below average heights through the country. Don't think it's particularly cold. The blocking seal to the north is quite weak. But I think that's quite an unsettled spring in 1851. Number 26 for the driest Februaries on record is 1917. The spring of 1917 is exceptionally unsettled. Deep trough of below average heights over the country. It's a cold and wet spring in 1917. Number 25 is 1895. So this is a very cold winter, of course, in 1895. February 1895 is a severely cold month, but it's also a very dry month, as a lot of our coldest months tend to be, actually. So this spring is probably impacted quite a bit by the winter pattern that carries over into spring, if you see what I mean. So these sort of springs following very cold winters, you have to be a bit cautious with them. Take with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because what happens, or what can often happen, doesn't always happen, but what can often happen is that when you have a very cold, unblocked type winter, that pattern will carry on into spring, particularly the early part of the spring. So this is a colder pattern. We've got high pressure up here. We've got below average heights to our south and east, and we'll be pulling it down cold northeasterly winds. We go through to number 24, and this again is again following a cold winter. This is 1929. So the 24th driest February for England and Wales is 1929. This how the spring of 1929 looks. It's a block spring, has high pressure up towards Iceland, and we're bringing in winds from the east direction. Again, that is probably carrying over from the cold winter pattern. Next spring is 1863, so this is following the 23rd driest February for England and Wales. This one, very unsettled, below average heights through the country. Does favour westerly winds though, so it's a mild spring overall in 1863, but very wet. 1886 is number 22 on the driest Februaries on record. This one, again, it does have some above average heights to the north, but really it's this trough of below average heights to our west that's bringing in these westerly winds. So that's a rather Atlantic driven and fairly mild spring. Number 21 for the driest Februaries on record is 1858. The spring of 1858 again is looking unsettled, below average heights of the country. Again, not sure it's particularly cold. The blocking signal to the north is quite weak, but we are favouring unsettled conditions with low pressure. So far, this package of analogues does look a little bit more unsettled compared to the CT analogues package. Number 20 for the driest Februaries on record is 1890, and the spring of 1890 is also unsettled, below average heights to the west-southwest, probably quite mild, maybe even fairly warm, bringing up winds from a southerly to southeasterly direction, but it does look like it's a very unsettled spring. 1942 is the 19th driest February on record. The spring of 1942 is rather a bizarre looking pattern with above average heights sitting to our east, below average heights to the west. Probably quite unsettled with that trough in the Atlantic, and reasonably mild, I would have thought, reasonably warm spring with the winds probably from a southerly direction. Number 18 is 1924. So this one, this spring has quite a strong blocking signal up to the north. Below average heights are in the Atlantic. Despite that big area of blocking around Greenland, I think overall it's probably quite a mildish spring in 1924, though it is unsettled. We're just not quite on the right side of the blocking to be particularly cold. Spring 1909 comes up next. Now, this looks like a much colder spring. We've got below average heights to our south. We've got a very strong blocking signal up towards Greenland. We're pushing the jet stream southwards with this trough of below average heights, and I'm sure we'll be pulling in cold air from a northeasterly direction. That follows on from a cold winter, though, in 1908, 1909. So it's probably a bit of a carry-on from that cold winter. Then we've got 1930, so February 1930 was the 16th driest February for England and Wales. The spring of 1930 looks unsettled with below average heights over the country. That looks like a very unsettled spring there. 1952 is number 15, and this spring looks drier, so it has above average heights over and to the east of the country, below average heights in the Atlantic. There's a famous late spring blizzard at the end of March in 1952. Overall, that looks like a drier spring. Then we've got 1956, so number 14 on the driest Februaries on record for England and Wales is 1956. It's a severely cold month, of course. And then we see that the spring of 1956 is anticyclonic, with an area of above average height centred over top of the country. Very dry spring preceding what became an exceptionally wet summer. Then we move through to number 13, which is 1896. So this spring has above average heights to our west of us in 1896. So it's probably quite dry, blocking off the Atlantic. Probably fairly cool, bringing the winds around from a northerly direction. Number 12 for the driest Februaries on record for England and Wales is 1887. This looks like it's probably a colder spring with below average heights to the south, a fairly strong blocking signal up towards Greenland and Iceland. You'll be expecting to be bringing cold air in from the north or northeast direction. That looks like pretty delayed spring and a cold spring in 1887. Probably quite dry though. Number 11 is 1862. This one looks very unsettled with below average heights again through the UK and into Northern Europe, above average heights through Southern Europe, probably bringing up mild or even very mild air from a southwest direction. So that's a mild wet spring. Right, top 10. So the 10th driest February on record for England and Wales is 1998. We've already explored the spring of 1998. So just to recap, overall it has above average heights to our west. Not a particularly cold, not a particularly strong trough of below average heights to the east. It's a strange spring, has an unsettled and cool March. It's cold and exceptionally wet in April, and then we get summer in May. The best of the summer of 1998 is in May 1998. The 9th driest February on record for England and Wales is 1986, another very cold month, of course. The spring of 1986, very unsettled, below average heights over the top of the country, and bring the jet stream through like that. So that's an unsettled and wet spring in 1986. You notice the warm Central England temperature Februaries are not necessarily tying in with the dry Februaries. So a lot of the dry Februaries tend to be colder Februaries, I think, whereas a lot of the warm Februaries that we examined in the first batch of analogues, they're probably reasonably unsettled Februaries as well. So an interesting difference there, and it'll be interesting whether the outcomes of the spring are different too. Anyway, let's get on. So number 8 for the driest Februaries on record for England and Wales is 1965. The spring of 1965 has below average heights to our east, above average heights to the northwest. It's quite unsettled and quite a cold spring as well. Number 7 is 1993, the 7th driest February on record for England and Wales is 1993. The spring of 1993 is fairly warm and dry. Actually, it has below average heights to our west, has high pressure to our east. We favour bringing in an easterly wind. There's a lot of dry and quite warm weather in the spring of 1993. Number 6 is 1934. This one looks quite unsettled, with again a trough of below average heights through the UK. Top 5, the 5th driest May, of the 5th driest February on record, I should say, is 1895, and we find that with this one, we've got below average heights sitting up to our northeast, above average heights throughout to west, and we're bringing in the winds from an easterly direction with that one. Then we go through to number 4, which is 1921. So the spring of 1921 is looking like this, with below average heights to our north and to our south. An area of above average heights is across to the northeast, bringing in the winds from a southwesterly direction there in 1921. So it looks like it's relatively unsettled, but also relatively mild. Top 3. The 3rd driest February on record is 1932. And I'm not zoomed in on this one. So the spring of 1932 looks like this. It has a blocking signal up to the north. We've got high pressure up to the north. We've got below average heights over the UK as a trough. So it looks unsettled, and it looks as though it could be quite cold as well. Top 2, so the 2nd driest February on record for England and Wales is 1959. The spring of 1959 is very dry. It has above average heights to our northeast, below average heights are out to west, and we bring in those winds from a southerly southeast direction. So it's a dry and warm spring, very extended summer in 1959. And then finally, the driest spring on record for England and Wales, number 1, is the spring of 1891. And look how unsettled this spring was, with below average heights over the UK and much of Northern Europe. A blocking signal is in the Atlantic. So that one just looking really, really unsettled and cold in the spring of 1891. Putting it all together, this is how we come out. So in terms of the all March combined charts, much more unsettled when it's a March following a dry February compared to Marches that follow a warm February. So when you're following a dry February, you get this trough of below average heights over to the west of the country. Bit of a blocking signal as well. Not sure it's cold enough to make these marches particularly favouring cold conditions, although there would be some cold marches in there, I'm sure of that. The main thing, though, is that it does favour a very unsettled March. April, again, looking very unsettled. We have a bit of a blocking signal up to the north. We have below average heights over to the south of the country. So, again, got that blocking signal up to the north. Below average heights through the UK and Western Europe does look quite unsettled, and potentially there could be some colder air in there as well. May looks like this. So for May, it's a bit different from the CT data as well, because in May it's not quite as unsettled, funnily enough. It's more unsettled for March and April. It's not quite as unsettled for May, though. So this time you just get a weak trough of below average heights over to the south of the country. Bit of a blocking signal up to the north, but it's more centred over towards Canada. So I would assume these are a drier and a little bit warmer overall in the Mays. And then finally, this is how the springs themselves look when you put all of these years together, or rather it's the top 20 of those top 30. So when you put them all together, this is how it looks. It has below average heights over and to west of the country, has above average heights up to the north, the jet streams down there somewhere. So you're favouring a colder, wetter pattern than the springs overall when you're following very dry Februaries, compared to the drier and milder pattern that you're favouring for the springs when you're following warm February. So there's an interesting difference, and I think the difference is primarily down to the fact that the warm Februaries are often going to be quite unsettled, whereas the dry Februaries are probably going to be colder, and the dry Februaries, a lot of the time, I think, would be carrying on that or the dry Februaries will then carry on the colder pattern into the spring. You see what I mean? I've got a feeling that's where the difference would lie. That the warm Februaries tend to be more unsettled. The dry Februaries tend to be, the warm Februaries tend to be more unsettled. The dry Februaries tend to be coinciding with colder Februaries and colder winters, but then carries on into the spring. Anyway, interesting differences between the two analogues batches. We're going to bring this together tomorrow. So we're going to put this data with all of the other analogues updates that we've done through this season, and we're going to give you the GavsWeathers.com Spring 2019 forecast tomorrow. It'll be up at 10 a.m. in the morning, so it'll be up early, and you'll see what Gavs Weathers is predicting for the spring of 2019. Just a few hours to go. Right, we've got weekend forecast coming up later on this afternoon, and then we're also going to have your week to 10-day video update. This video update will be placed on the spring updates and forecast page. There'll be a written summary that goes with as well, just discussing everything to talk about in video. Tomorrow's spring 2019 forecast, and we'll have a Gavs Weathers sunny roundup as well. So come back for all the updates tomorrow and over the rest of today. But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.